Studio System Guardian Angel is a survival horror game that came out a few days ago. I followed it for a while before release, but I never played the demo since I wanted to go in as blind as I could. And now that it's got a full release, I wanted to give my thoughts on it.
Studio System.
It follows Rebecca, a girl in the last days of high school who's aimlessly lost in life. She gets a text to come to a club meeting where one of her friends reveals a secret hatch they discovered in the gym, leading to an abandoned film studio underneath the school. Rebecca, Tomorrow, and Jasmine all enter together, but things go wrong and you get separated from your friends, leaving you alone to explore this strange studio, uncover its divine and supernatural secrets, and try to find a way out of this nightmare. It's a classic fixed-angle survival horror with tank controls. I'm really glad to see fixed-angle stuff coming back in indie games, since it's something big developers have completely left in the past. But there's a lot of upsides to using a fixed camera that can greatly benefit a horror game. Since the developer gets complete control over what the player sees, you can do things like a harsh cut to show a monster and catch the player off guard, or catching a glimpse of something following you right before the camera cuts away. And of course you can do some great cinematic shots to give a sense of scale or make the player uncomfortable. It's also great because it means the player can't do something stupid like turning around and missing a set piece. But Studio System has something unique to differentiate itself from other games in the genre. You see, I wasn't exactly truthful when I called it a fixed-angle camera. By holding right-click, you can move the camera around and look through it as though you are the camera. On top of getting a better look around, this not quite fixed perspective is also the way you shoot enemies. Rather than having to plant your feet, aim a gun, and take the shot, you just point and click. This brings a unique dynamic to combat encounters. It lets you run away while shooting, which is obviously powerful, so in turn ammo is very scarce. You'll need to pick and choose who you shoot wisely. The only issue I had with this system is that when you left-click while aiming, it also counts as interacting with an object. Even though the interact prompt is spacebar, clicking also works, and aiming doesn't override this, so for example if you try to shoot something while too close to a door, you'll leave the room instead. It only came up a couple times, but it was a little annoying. Shortly into the game you'll get a melee weapon in the form of a baseball bat, and this sets up the classic risk versus consumption game you see in most survival horrors, where you either risk losing health in melee combat or consume ammunition to safely take out a threat. The bat's great in one-on-one encounters, since you can swing, back up, bait down an attack, swing, back up, and repeat until they're dead. But against groups you can quickly get overrun. On top of that, the bat itself has a kind of durability. The more you use it, the filthier it becomes, and once corrupted, your pact will be prevented from healing. I'll explain what pacts are a bit later, but for now, just know that that's really bad. You can fix it using pills, which also adds more decision making to the resource system. It also encourages you to look around the environments more, since you can sometimes find items hidden out of frame by moving the camera. It's a nice way to encourage use of the main mechanic and reward the player for their curiosity. I think the resource economy was pretty well balanced for the first playthrough. You'll find a lot of pickups early on, but this generosity doesn't last, and after the halfway point I felt like I was just barely scraping by, especially on the ammo front. Healing wasn't too much of a problem, but you die quick in this game. Just 3 hits and you're done for. If I was anything below full health, I felt like I was at death's door. I'd say the game is in a good spot difficulty-wise. I played on normal and still died a handful of times, but I'd imagine it could be a bit more frustrating if you aren't used to tank controls and need some time to adjust. I know tank controls can be off-putting to some, but I honestly feel like the hate for them is extremely overblown. Yeah, they suck in something like a 3D platformer, but in a fixed-angle game with a slower pace, I think they work fine and can even be beneficial. That added sluggishness makes combat a lot more methodical since your position can't be so easily adjusted, and it makes regular encounters feel way more tense. Because let's be real, most survival horror enemies aren't that dangerous. They're usually some variation of slow-moving thing that swings at you when you get too close. It's not like I'm gonna pop into this room and have Nameless King jump out at me. The threat instead comes from the resources you stand to lose. If you get hit, that's one less healing item you're never getting back, and the same goes for bullets you spend to take them out more easily. It's a lot harder for me to feel this danger with modern movement where I can dance around the enemies no problem, so I think tank controls can be a bit better in that regard. I'm not saying they're always beneficial. You ever play Signalis with tank controls? It sucks, because that game wasn't designed with them in mind. But Studio System was built entirely around its tank controls. They're the intended way to play, and I think they work great. But I don't know, maybe I've got Stockholm Syndrome or something. If you really hate tank controls that much, there is a setting to swap them out for what the game calls 2D controls, which are a more modern movement system. And they work fine, but I'd rather stick with what the developer intended. Okay, so pacts. Near the start of the game, you get to pick one of 3 pacts, and they can be a bit confusing, so here's the gist of it. Pacts have health that decays over time, at a rate depending on which one you pick. Completing their task will secure the pact, which means healing it. Extermination decays the slowest and gets healed by killing enemies, Photography decays the fastest and lets you take photos of enemies to heal it, and Friendship decays at a medium rate and gets healed by interacting with these phones you can find throughout your playthrough. Packed Health will determine what ending you get after finishing the game, so you want to stay on top of doing your task and managing your bat's corruption to stop them from dropping into the red. I picked the Friendship pack since exploration is my favorite part of survival horror. Don't pick Friendship. I could be stupid, but I swear I stopped finding the phones in the last third of the game, and having Packed Health tied to time and exploration is inherently kind of risky, since the more time I spend wandering aimlessly looking for phones, the lower my Packed Health is going to drop. I got the worst ending on my first playthrough. But I'll give the game the benefit of the doubt and assume I was just stupid and probably missed a phone somewhere near the end. Hey, last minute addition, they patched this. The Friendship Pact also heals slightly when you pick up items now, on top of decaying a little slower, so it's probably a lot more manageable on a blind playthrough. And the 3 packs are a lot more balanced now, so you can pick whichever one you want. The second time around I picked Extermination and it went a lot smoother. It's got the slowest decay, and killing enemies is something you're probably going to be doing anyway. This game's pretty short, so replaying it for multiple endings isn't too big of a hassle. My first playthrough was completely blind and took around 4 hours, and subsequent playthroughs are only like an hour and a half since you know what you're doing. On a second playthrough there's some slight differences and extra goodies to unlock things like alternate game modes or costumes. Not much to say about them, I just really like that they're here. Costumes are one of my favorite survival horror tropes. There's also these red lens caps that are used for a bonus ending you can only do on a second playthrough. There's 9 caps in total, but you only need 6, so you'll probably find enough from exploring on your own. I would recommend trying to get all the endings, especially ending B. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's the most fleshed out ending and has a couple of really cool moments in it. There's 4 endings, and in my third playthrough, I thought of a way to get multiple in the same run. I was going to save my game a bit before the ending, get the blue ending, then reload my save and simply wait around for my Packed Health to drop into the yellow. My plan was flawless. Except I'm an idiot. I picked Extermination when I did this. The pact with the slowest decay. Because of my foolishness, I had to wait 50 minutes for it to drop into the yellow. You could probably beat the game in that time. So yeah, if you plan on doing that, don't be a dumbass like me. Also, this is something I've only noticed just now during editing, but Rebecca's hair grows throughout the game in real time. I don't even know what to say about that, it's just really cool. I don't think I've played any other game that does that. Oh yeah, there's also an epilogue if you get all endings and then S-rank all the challenges. You'll use the camera for more than just looking around and shooting. Press Q while looking at something with an eye on it, and you can move it around, which gets used for things like making bridges, shaking items out of bins, stacking boxes on Becky's head, and of course solving puzzles. I guess I should talk about the puzzles. Most are pretty straightforward, but some make you think a little outside the box. I never got outright stuck on anything, but there was some that I solved without feeling like I completely understood them. This one with the boxes and code in particular, you each get a number from a different hint, but I didn't actually figure out the first hint and just inferred the answer backwards from the second one. I don't want to spoil puzzle solutions for people who haven't played, so I'll just put up something vague to try and get what I mean across for people who have played. I do love the way you get the third number though. I thought that was pretty clever, even if it's not super hard to figure out. The times when you need to move platforms could be a little janky. Rebecca doesn't move with the platform, so sometimes you can slide off or the physics could freak out and bounce you really high. But there's no real punishment for failure, it just sets you back a little bit, you don't take damage or anything, so I never got that bothered by it. I did almost get stuck once though, where I fell off halfway through this room and then the platform was stuck too far away from my camera, and falling off would reset its position. I thought I'd have to reload my save, but if I just barely walked off the edge I could quickly slide the platform under my feet before I'd fall. It still took me a couple tries, and outside of this one time, I hadn't really had any issues with platforms across my 3 playthroughs. I won't talk too much on the story, since it just released and I'd like to avoid spoiling it, but I think it's alright. The narrative can be a bit messy, it throws around a lot of ideas pretty loosely, but I don't really mind. I feel like not really understanding what's going on most of the time ties into the surreal and mysterious nature of the game, and makes the moments of clarity that cut through the confusion more impactful. Over the course of the game, I did come to love the cast of characters. They all have well-defined personalities, and I enjoyed finding out more about them through their dialogue. Characters can sometimes speak unnaturally, but in a way that feels intentionally eerie rather than out of character. There is occasionally some clumsy wording or grammatical errors, but nothing that I can't forgive, especially for a solo developer. Also, I shouldn't be one to talk, I write all my scripts in Notepad and never proofread anything. So overall, the story is a bit rough, but I liked it, and I think it fits the game well. You'd mainly be playing this game for its atmosphere, which is by far Studio System's strongest aspect. The visuals, camera angles, soundtrack, and sound design all come together wonderfully to give this game some beautiful ambience. I talked a bit last video about that weirdly cozy, creepy feeling I get from some horror games, and whatever that is, this game has it. There's a large variety in areas, but they're all surreal and bizarre in a way that never makes you feel particularly safe. Also, I loved how during the introduction, the pause screen is this old, like, PS1 or Dreamcast looking menu showing your grades, but then once you get into the studio, it changes to a more traditional survival horror menu. The character art and drawings also all look phenomenal, and it adds a very personal touch to the game's aesthetic. Also, I've gotten no idea where else to say this, but I love how the save screen looks, and the occasional glimpses of things you'd get in loading screens was super cool. This game also sounds good. Sometimes when you enter rooms or before cutscenes, you'll briefly hear a really loud sound, which could be very jarring. But outside of small bugs like that, the sound design is amazing. Your exploration of these dreamlike, or rather nightmarish spaces is backed by this ominous ambience, and it always kept me anxious about what could be around the corner. That tension set me up for a few good scares. Even simple things started catching me off guard. God, that actually got me. I usually get less scared the further into a horror game I get, since I'll have wisened up to a lot of its tricks, but Studio System was the opposite. When I got the bat, I was feeling confident, barging into rooms like I owned the place, but some of the later areas were genuinely creeping me out. Despite most enemies not being that scary on their own, the soundscape of combat was so unsettling that I still dreaded encountering them. The music ranges from ambient droning noise to some genuinely pleasant tunes. I'm no music expert, so that's all I can really say about it, but I hope the soundtrack gets released somewhere someday. I praised the camera earlier, but I'm gonna do it some more. Fixed angles just allow for so many creative shots that can make the player feel uneasy by tilting it or making the player walk off screen, or finding a dark corridor that you can't see the end of and walking down it, further and further, getting fully engulfed in the darkness. And then the camera catches up to you. It adds an extra layer of how you can mess with the player's expectation in a way that you just simply can't do with something like an over-the-shoulder third-person camera. Before wrapping up, I'll talk about the settings and bonus modes. There's a couple accessibility options, like giving you a HUD element showing health and ammo, or a directional indicator showing which way you're facing. I could see this being helpful in those later sections with thin platforms you have to walk across. There's also some preference stuff like inverted aiming or hold to interact, and a low graphics setting to make the game look crunchier. And of course there's the 2D controls I mentioned earlier. I guess I'll put a spoiler warning before talking about the bonus modes. There won't be story spoilers, but it's still post-game content, so if you want to avoid it, skip to the timecode on screen. Challenges are neat. They're a segment of the game with more enemies around, and you have to clear them all out as fast as you can. It lets you focus on the action side of the game without the same pressure you'd have in story mode, and it was a lot of fun just going through and clearing rooms. Though in Challenge 3 I forgot to take the elevator up and missed one enemy, but you can't backtrack through this door, so I couldn't go looking for who I missed before restarting. Minor nitpicks aside, I think these are pretty fun. The combat is simple, but having to go as fast as possible puts a different kind of pressure on the player. There's an EX hard mode, which is the same as regular hard mode, but limits you to 3 heals and 6 shots for the entire game. Outside of boss fights, you'll get no pickups at all. You've really got to conserve your resources here. Your only saving grace is that the pills fully heal you here. And my personal favorite mode is first person. You get to play the whole game from a new perspective. This is pretty neat. Some puzzles don't really work, and the cutscenes are completely broken, but it's still a super cool addition. It really lets you get a better look at things you couldn't see earlier, and it's just fun to re-explore the game from a new perspective. Studio System Guardian Angel is a truly unique experience. It's an experimental work, and with that it's bound to be a little rough around the edges, but never so much that it stops being enjoyable, and the sheer amount of passion on display more than makes up for its shortcomings. I made this video because I loved my time with this game and wanted more people to hear about it. I know it's kinda dumb to say that, since nobody's gonna watch this, but I wanted to do what I could to get this game in front of more people. Studio System definitely isn't a game for everyone, but I feel like its target audience could find something very special here. It's going to mean a lot more to less people, is what I'm trying to say. It's a new and unique take on the genre, and if you're a fan of old survival horror, or like the aesthetic, or just think the game looks neat, I'd recommend you give it a chance. And if the developer sees this video, you've made something really special, and you should be proud of it. Thanks for watching.